Thank you for joining us. It's good to be here, good to be back, and good to have you all with us. And welcome to the April BCS Agile Methods virtual event. Really good one lined up for you and this session. Looking forward to getting into it, and we'll introduce our speaker in a sec. Just the usual sort of formalities. So if you've not been with us before, very warm welcome to you. I'm Sath Palsingh, everybody calls me Sath. I'm chair of BCS Agile Methods, and I'm joined by a number of my fellow committee members to support the session. We're going to be helping out with some facilitation this evening, so we're going to have to roll up our sleeves as well a little bit. So we're looking forward to that. We've got Ahmad, our treasurer. Ahmad, give us a wave, give everyone a wave. We've got David. David, give everyone a wave. And we've got Martin. So that's it. So we're the three officers, 4 officers of the committee. Others can join us, but all good. Code of conduct, very simple. We just ask that you respect for one another and everyone to have a wonderful experience. So yep, let's all be nice. That's all that we ask, and we should have some questions at the end for any Q&A that comes up. If you do have questions that come up for you along the way, feel free to just drop them in the chat, prefix them with a Q, and we can pick them up later in the session. It's quite interactive. We are going to put you into breakout rooms for about 50 minutes later on to let you actually try your hand at a few things and play around, and it should be a really good experience because we've already had a go at it and we had a lot of fun doing it. And with that, we are delighted to welcome James Carpenter to BCS Agile Methods. James is very experienced. He's got extensive experience in Agile, in software. He's got a lot of grounding in it, and was started off as a hands-on developer for many years, which led him into coaching and system thinking, which is kind of really what brings us here this evening. He's in a very small minority, because I hadn't appreciated that the less trainer community is actually quite small compared to some other frameworks, and I think it's actually quite rigorous and difficult to become certified as a trainer. So we're honored to have James here to share his experience with us, and he's going to be taking us through a very interesting exercise using the causal loop diagramming, which is going to be a lot of fun for you all. So I think without further ado, I'm gonna hand over to James so he can introduce what we're going to be doing, and then later on we will let you all have a go quite shortly. So welcome, James. Thanks for joining us, and over to yourself.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. So a privilege to be here. I'm talking to you from the great city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, across the pond here. There's so much to Les. Les gets into organizational structural change to a greater degree than any other approach that I'm aware of that, truly shifts the power dynamics to the team. It's almost like taking a time warp back 25 years from now, or 25 years ago, before things got so distorted. So you're talking cross-functional, cross-component teams as close to the customer as possible, et cetera. In a short time, it's not really possible to go through and explain all of the things that Les does. And we could talk about process flow mechanics, but that's actually not nearly as important as the organizational design choices that are being made in Les. And more importantly, why are those choices made? And one of the tools that's used to help explore this, especially in like a conversational setting or in a workshop setting or in a Les practitioner course, is a tool called system modeling, which is under this umbrella of systems thinking, such as you've surely done 5 whys and fishbone diagrams and other techniques. And all of that fits in we've got Madeline just showed up, so one of our facilitators. All of this fits under the umbrella of systems thinking, but in the case of modeling, what we wish to do is try to model an organization and how different organizational design choices influence the outcomes so that we can have deeper understanding. And ideally, we want this to be largely agnostic of framework. So it's just, let's model the organizational physics And in order to do that, we have to have some notation to do it. And so we need a notation that's just rich enough to facilitate conversation, but not so complex that we get lost in the notation itself. So what I'm going to do today, and I'll go ahead and share the slides for you, is so let me close this out. So we're going to walk you through this, and pretty soon I'm going to throw you in the deep end of the pool and have you do some modeling, because in large measure, until you've experienced for yourself, it's hard to really kind of relate to the rest of the lecture. And so the best way is to let you experience it. But in order to allow you to experience it, I've trained up facilitators, but I also kind of need to set the stage so you understand expectations before we all collectively throw you in the deep end of the pool. So to start with, let me give you an example of some system variables. So the ones we're going to end up using later here are the number of backlogs or the number of lists. Now this is not how deep the list is. It's not depth of backlog. This is just, how many lists are there that are being used to manage the work that's in the organization within the product development organization. Percentage of total items the team knows well. And in this case, this is conflated variable. This is both how well do they understand the business problems that they're solving, or do they come to fully understand the business domain and they're being brought business problems? And also, how well do they understand the code, the firmware, if this may be a hardware system, the hardware engineering aspect. So it's how well do they understand it both from the business perspective of what we're trying to accomplish, as well as from a technical perspective. These could be split. In this case, they're a single variable. Adaptiveness of teams to change direction at a global level. And here what we're focused on is, if a little component team can inspect and adapt very quickly, but all that does is modify some component, say the shopping cart service, but that doesn't affect an end-to-end change in the system that's meaningful to the end customer, then that adaptability is not that important. So this is like lean gold rat. We wish to talk about global optimization far more so than local optimization. Not that local optimization doesn't have some value, but it always needs to be in service to the global optima. And so here we're looking at adaptiveness of teams to change direction at a global level is, just that, or it's the ability of the organization to turn on a dime for a dime. Opportunity cost, if we're spending time doing one thing, we're not spending time doing another thing. I'm grateful for all the time that you're spending with me here today. And that's time that you're not spending with your family, or your cat, right? Your cat would be jealous there. And so that's opportunity cost. And then percentage of items worked on each sprint, or you could just say time period, that are the highest value at a global level. Because the intent here is to model the organizational physics, not to get worried about, is it framework X, is it Kanban, is it Scrum, is it SAFe, is it Discipline Agile? From a modeling perspective, I don't care. And one of the benefits of the model is that it doesn't care, is that let's not get absorbed into this or that religious argument. Let's talk about how do things actually work. And then I'm about to show you kind of notational syntax. What we have here are system variables. And you'll notice that these system variables are, they don't have an opinion. It doesn't say an increasing percentage of total items the team knows well, or a decreasing percentage of an items a team knows well. It just says percentage of items a team knows well. It doesn't say how much, it doesn't say an increasing amount of water in the bathtub or a decreasing amount of water in the bathtub. It just says how much water is in the bathtub or how much cash is in the bank. And so there's an art to writing the system variables in a way that's just like, it's like the temperature. So let's talk about notation. So, one of the things that, as we send into breakout rooms, one of the reasons we're doing this is so that we have some way to externalize what we're discussing and put it on the wall, or in our case, a Miro board, so that we can bring the collective understanding out into the open and have a discussion. And to do that, we need some kind of notation. So this is a causal loop diagram. So this is a system model, leveraging causal loop diagram notation. And the basics of a CLD are pretty simple. So here we have 3 example system variables. We have feature velocity, number of defects, and code quality. Now we could get into arguments about is feature velocity a good thing or a bad thing. That's not relevant to what we're trying to do here, which is I just want a very small handful of variables on the page so I can explain the notation and not get lost in, is feature velocity get abused, which it usually does. So feature velocity, number of defects, and code quality. And as notated, if the feature velocity goes up, the number of defects would go up, all else being equal. And that is indicated with an arrow from feature velocity to the number of defects. So that is to say it is causal in this direction. The causality is in this direction. If the number of defects were to go up, the feature velocity would go down. So here we have, the causal direction is in this direction, is from the number of defects to feature velocity, except the polarity is the opposite. So the O indicates that in this case, if the number of defects were to go up, the feature velocity would go down. And you do that simply by adding an O. And sometimes you'll see a minus, which is basically the same thing. Here we have, if code quality goes up, the number of defects.
You just went mute on me. I don't know if you're mute on for other people or not.
Can everyone hear me? Madeline tends to be in her own little world, I'm picking on you. No. Okay, thanks for letting me know, though. Everyone else can hear? No, okay. So if code quality goes up, then the number of defects would go down. And again, that's notated by the O. And then what's interesting is that you can read this transitively. So if code quality goes up, the number of defects go down. If the number of defects go down, the feature velocity goes up. And even if you didn't know what these variables were, even if it was just X, Y, and Z, you could look at this transitive path and you could say, well, I can follow these arrows in this direction. And along this path, there are 2 opposites. And because there's 2 opposites, because there's an even number of opposites, they cancel each other out. So this is saying that this variable, whatever it happens to be, when this goes up, this will go up via the transitive relationship that's shown. And lastly, there's also notation for a delay syntax. And there's a bunch of other notations, but this is the basics that matter. So if code quality were to go up, feature velocity would eventually go up, but there might be some delay in that happening. If we wanted, we could draw an extra variable out here, which is effort applied to improve code quality. And if we spend a lot of time and energy to improve code quality, in the short term, it will lower feature velocity, but it will definitely make the code quality go up. So there's sort of a delayed impact from that. And that variable's not here because that would add an extra variable, and we're just trying to show you notation. So in just a moment, we're going to put you in breakouts of 3 to 5 people each, or the truth is based on how many facilitators we have, which is Madeline's here. I don't think David's here. So we've got 5 facilitators plus myself, and I'll float if I can, and if I can't, then I'll take a room. Depends on head count. Expect to struggle at first. I am intentionally throwing you into the deep end of the pool so that you struggle and learn. And that will make the rest of the conversation and discussion far more meaningful because we'll be talking about something you've actually experienced. And I will visit the breakout rooms to keep people unstuck. But more importantly, in this case, I'm going to have facilitators in each breakout, so I can largely rely on them. And we trained them up yesterday, and Madeline in the past. So. Again, here are the variables that you're going to be modeling in Miro. So the number of backlogs or the number of lists, not to be confused with the depth of backlog. The percentage, and this is really like product backlog, not like sprint backlog. Percentage of items a team knows well. This is both in terms of the business need as well as in terms of the code base or other technical aspects. Adaptiveness of teams to change direction at a global level, opportunity cost, and percentage of items worked on each time period or each sprint that are the highest value at a global level, again, relevant to the outside walls of the company, not just to some internal component team, for example. Any questions before we throw you in the deep end of the pool?
James, just before we do that, sharing your Miro. Do we need to do that because they're going to be using that.
So we need to share the Miro, right?
Yep. When do you want us to?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, share the Miro with them.
I will drop that into the chat. I'm dropping that in the chat now, folks. So you'll be working off this once James gets us started. So if you can access that link, you'll see it in the chat.
In fact, I should do this too. I should share them. Let's do. So there are different whiteboards. There's, table 1 whiteboard, table 2 whiteboard, table 3 whiteboard, table 4 whiteboard. Whatever breakout room number that you're in, that's your assigned whiteboard. So the mapping between Zoom breakout room and portion of the Miro board is, whatever that number is. Unless there's any questions.
How many breakouts do you want? I'm just getting it set up now.
How many people do we have?
So we've got 6 facilitators. So you basically got 24 people, 24 wonderful attendees from our community. So if it's 24 folk minus us 6, so that's your 5 plus.
Why don't you do groups of 5 so I can be a floater?
Okay. 5 breakouts. So I'm not.
If you say we have 25 people, that'd be about right.
I'm not including the co-hosts. Sign automatically. Right. So that should be coming now. 5 rooms. Okay. So, did you all get invites to a room now?
It's showing everyone has not joined. I don't think you auto assigned them.
Oh, we have to join on our own, right?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, so they can hop. Okay.
But as a facilitator, so as a, what do you call it? As Zoom master, you can throw them in a room.
I thought I'd done that. So I've set up the rooms. Is anybody going in a room now?
Not yet. All right. Let me start assigning people.
No, I did it so it would do automatically, so that didn't happen for some reason. Kind of strange. Yeah, if you can do that, that would be helpful. I thought it did it, but it didn't look like it did.
Technology is great. I'll go and join room 5, all right? And I'll facilitate that room.
Okay,
Cool.
good man. Thank you.
Martin, do you want to call a room?
I can't see any of the breakout rooms at the moment, so I've got no way of choosing one. I need to be put in one.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I did it.
Yeah,
So
it's a strange
done
one.
it. It just
Hang
got
on.
stuck.
I got a message saying this is an old version of Zoom.
It's not done that
You have
before.
limited options.
Yeah, well,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've just got that right.
don't
Which
be
breakout
disheartened
do you
with
want
the
me to go
technology
in,
fails
sir?
you pick one. So
Pick-
David went to
pick one.
5. So why don't you go to 4? Just go to
I'll
4.
go to 4.
We'll work back. We'll work back the way. So I can see folk. Yeah, so there are folk in 1, there are folk in 2. Yeah, so we're still assigning. I'm just doing that. So
Yeah,
it's
nearly
working.
done.
Yeah, I should have done automatically. That's the option I selected, and then it didn't do anything. Oh well.
Which
So,
one was David in?
David's in 5.
All right.
So Martin's gone into 4. So yeah, we could just go in whatever one's
Martin's in
over.
4. Okay, I'll go into 2 then.
Okay, you go into 2. I could go into 3 then.
Let's see. Where's Madeline?
And
She's in
Madeline.
4.
Madeline. Oh, so they're both in 4. So we don't want Martin. We don't want Martin and Madeline in 4.
We kick out one of them.
Yeah. So let's move. Should we move Martin to 3? I felt a bit bad doing that. Martin might go, what happened? What happened?
What happened?
What
I'll
happened?
figure it out.
All right, cool. I'm joining 2.
And then I'll go into 1 then. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'll set a timer for us, by the way. I can find it.
I think that's worked.
Timer. Do you know where timer is on Miro?
Right. Okay. So some people, where are we now? We're back in the main room.
Yeah, it'll take a moment for people to percolate back in.
There we go. I'm closing all the rooms. Okay. Right. All rooms are closing in 30 seconds. So people will start to come back in. All right, 10 seconds to go. And anybody still in the room will experience that wonderful thing we all experience when you get thrown. You literally get thrown out. Usually it's when somebody says something really profound, isn't it?
And the number of items worked on.
Oh dear.
Uh-oh.
Right, that should
Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. We'll just keep going.
Let's.
So thinking about what we were just talking about there, now what is the relationship between the number of backlogs or lists and the number of items worked on each sprint that are of the highest value?
So you have multiple items of highest value, and that's a problem.
So guys, I don't want to stop you there. Like, have you should have been brought back into the main room? Are you? I think you're back with us all now. So we've called time on that. No, it's okay. It sounds like you're having an invigorating conversation.
Let's debrief together.
Yeah, exactly.
Are the breakout rooms closed? Is everybody back?
Yes.
Okay, at last. All right. So let's do a debrief. I'm sure there was pain and suffering. That was part of the point, was to experience doing it. And it's always a little rougher in some rooms than the other, and you just never know. It's kind of up to what mix you get. If I were modeling this, this is how I would model. This does not mean this is the only way to model. This is one potential solution based on the way that I happen to think about the problem, which isn't necessarily the way that others might think about the problem. So the way that I would think about it is that if the number of lists goes up, that the percentage of total items a team knows well would go down. And I also think that if the teams have a better understanding of the code base, a better understanding of the business as a whole, they understand the business problems, are being brought the business problems, then most likely the team will have the ability to adapt much quicker. There was another, I think it was one of the boards, I think it was the third board, we introduced a variable of ability to see the whole, which I think is also, and we kind of had that as if the number of backlogs went up, it decreased the ability to see the whole, and the ability to see the whole would make the adaptiveness better as well. So it's kind of another variable out to the side, and that made sense to me as well. If the adaptiveness of the teams to change direction at a global level is better, then I would think that over time you would have that would lower your opportunity cost, because you would be able to pivot quicker. You'd be able to turn on a dime for a dime, but there may be some delay in that. I think that the percentage of items worked on each sprint or each time period that are the highest value at a global level is really two sides of the same coin with opportunity cost. It's really almost definitionally the opposite of opportunity cost. And the way you would notationally draw that is just to put definition on the line. And notice this is a double arrow, again, with an opposite. Again, this is my view of how I would do this. And then, of course, if the backlogs go up, the percentage of items that are worked on each sprint at the global high, the percentage of items worked on each sprint at the highest value at a global level would go down, because the odds are that some of the teams are working on things that are just not important at a large level. They made maybe the most important thing in their list, but if you were to consolidate the list and take the time and effort to do that, you would discover that what team X was working on just wasn't that important to the business overall. And it does indeed take time and effort to have a consolidated list, but frequently that's better than working on something that isn't more important. Let's talk about why we do system modeling in the first place. So what we're trying to do is to see the system dynamics. And I'm sure that all of you have been in rooms, have been in conversations that you could talk all day long, and each person just keeps defending their own position. And they talk about this framework or that framework or this theory or that theory. But because you're not somehow slowing the conversation down and getting what people are thinking on the wall and helping them to feel safe. So, okay, my idea is indeed represented, and we can see how these things start to interact with each other. You just end up with a conversation that just swirls forever. And one of the things that will happen with system modeling or any other kind of technique that helps to externalize the thoughts and get them, in the common space, is that you can see the system dynamics. You can see how people are looking at things. So even the variables that I gave you, different people have different interpretations of what that means. And through conversation, you can tease out what each person actually thinks that variable means, and you can change it, or you can clarify it. You may put a note by it and say, well, for our discussion, we're going to assume that this variable means this thing. And if we have this other concept that we think we should tease it out into a separate thing, then let's make a separate variable for it, right? And so this provides a way to externalize what people are thinking. The other thing is you can see local optimization. So again, like if you look at this example, I would argue that if you had a list for each team, let's say you had a bunch of component teams, and you had a list for each component team, you would probably have teams that were really, really good at making changes to that component they owned. And they may be very good at staying within their area of expertise and have really good capacity utilization within that area of expertise. But in terms of value delivery and overall adaptability, it's probably very counterproductive. And so, and one of the ways you could fix that is by saying, let's have a single list and let's go to the effort to do that. Now, to do that effectively, you're going to need, good large group facilitation techniques in order to keep it from being an impossible number of dependencies that you have to manage in the first place. You're going to need cross-functional, cross-component teams so that, what Les calls a feature team. Sometimes you hear this called a product team. I don't care what you call it. I care that, you have teams that can work end to end and deliver value to the customer and understand what the customer needs. Call it what word you want. So you can identify root causes, and then what you're doing is looking for levers of greatest change. Any questions before I move on? Or do we have any questions in the chat?
Not question as such. Tom has a perspective on, I guess, the exercise and perhaps the validity of it. I know it's for illustrative purposes to explain what we're trying to do from a model.
Okay, let's see if that comes out. That may come out in the next slide.
I think it would.
That's fine. I'm happy to not comment except in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, whatever you're comfortable with. So I wouldn't use this to decide where you're going to go for lunch, right? This is a technique that the problem needs to be gnarly enough to be worth the time to slow down and slowly think through it, right? Now, if the role of management is to improve the system and they have no value other than improving the system, then, well, what does management have to do all day then to, think through how to make the system better? But that is their job. But if they shouldn't be managing the work, because I would argue that the team should be self-managing, that's, a rant to itself. So you have to use this technique where it makes sense. Small groups work best. I don't think this scales to more than 5 or 6 people in a discussion group, maybe 7 or 8. And so if you're going to do this in a larger setting, you have to do some sort of breakouts like we're doing. And then you have to do diverge and merge of some sort, or you have to give different groups different problems to go after. So that's one of the challenges, is this thing doesn't scale that well. Due to time constraints, I gave you pre-seeded variables, and it would have taken even longer had I not. So if you are working from scratch, it has the ability to, you can gain deeper insights. There's a greater sense of ownership if you're creating the variables. There's probably a better nuance of understanding and nuance of articulating the system. But it takes even longer when you do that. Whereas here, I'm just trying to teach you the basic technique, and it's faster to just give you the variables. Insights are limited by participant experience, and I believe this is true of all systems thinking techniques, whether we're talking 5 whys or fishbone diagrams, or open up any systems thinking book and look through whatever techniques you want. If you don't have knowledgeable people in the room that understand the thing being discussed, don't expect to have, meaningful insights. I remember seeing a group that was, I wasn't in a position I was going to be able to, engage and say so. But I remember a group doing a fishbone diagramming exercise in a classroom context, which they did following some value stream mapping exercises. And they sort of Dunning-Krugered themselves to the perception that they understood why things were happening. And they had picked a given organizational context to discuss that one of the participants had familiarity with. And I didn't know what exactly was going on at the organization being discussed. The only thing I was confident of is these people who were not actually involved in slinging code had no freaking clue what the truth was. But they convinced themselves they did. So, if you find yourself in a discussion where you don't have the answers that you need, that's fine. You go, oh, we need to go get these answers. Maybe you write the question on the wall, right? Maybe you go do some research as a group. Maybe you go find someone and bring them into the conversation. But don't expect to get great insights if you don't have people in the room that understand the system being discussed at any level of depth. This is only a tool, like any other systems thinking tool, to help get out what's there. It is limited. So this is way easier in person than it is doing it remote. I mean, here we've got, most of you have your cameras off. It's hard to understand what, even in our cameras are on, I can't see your feet. It's hard to know what body language is. It's just much harder to have conversational rapport in a Zoom, in a remote setting. What's amazing is that we can do it at all. But it is better in person. And depending on the topic, if it's a real contentious topic, all the more reason that the conversations are likely to be more productive in person than they are remote. Like riding a bicycle at a little bit of time, it takes it takes a while before you don't wobble, you keep your balance, and you focus on, early on when you're learning to ride a bicycle, you're like trying not to fall and you're not worried about, let's go to the ice cream stand, right? Let's go get a snow cone or whatever. But once you get past the mechanics, you're like, hey, look at my friends, we're gonna go to the snow cone stand and get a snow cone, right? And you're not thinking about like, how do you brake and how do you balance? It just becomes second nature. The notational syntax here is very simple, but there's still enough that it takes, even with it being simple, it takes a few hours of using it before it sort of sinks into the subconscious. And y'all have not had the benefit of that. So, you know, you're going to stumble on the syntax initially. So those are constraints that would be true if, say, David and I went into a room and we wanted to have a conversation about an organization we were working at, and we wanted to, you know, have a conversation for half a day or a day and kind of really understand some nuances, where no one gives us the variables, and we're just trying to slowly think through and figure out what to do about a situation. But what if you want to walk people through so they discover for themselves how different organizational design choices influence outcomes, but you need to do this in a large group setting? How could you do it? Now, in the case of a less practitioner class, we actually use, many of us, Craig's kind of the prototype, and I'm doing it similar way, and I'd say about a third of the less trainers do this. We typically make use of system modeling as sort of a backbone of the course design, and we give people system variables, let them do the modeling, you know, clarify the variable set, send them off the wall, let them do the modeling, then bring everybody to one wall, debrief that conversation, you know, debrief the wall, look for cognitive cobwebs. And then perhaps, like in my case, I'll have them look at concrete reference implementation information, which is not abstract, which is just a reference, one example reference implementation. And then we'll go back to pure abstract again, and I give them more variables. Now, that technique could be used for something that had nothing to do with how to do product development organizations. So what if you find yourself needing to do system modeling as a instructional design tool, not just as a systems thinking tool? Well, one of the, if that's the handcuffs that you're trying to work within, if you're taking them to the same model, instead of giving each table a different model and a different problem to go solve, you're going to need diverge and merge. So for example, in a less practitioner class, I clarify the variable set, I send them off to do the modeling, and then I bring everybody together and we look at one particular wall and we debrief it. Due to time constraints, you end up doing preceded variables, or at least mostly preceded variables. For example, in table 3, there was a variable that we pulled out of our ear in the middle of the discussion. That might well happen, and it's not, that's encouraged when it makes sense. But mostly, I can kind of tell you what typical variables are, and I'm standing on the shoulders of Craig and others who've kind of evolved these over the years. And so it helps to just give you the variables to start with. It also helps if everybody puts the variables in the same place, because when you're going to go and compare walls, it's helpful if, you know, it's easy to visually do a diff. And also you want each table to have as much diversity as possible. So you ideally want people who have ground truth, or people who come from Gemba, like in a software product development context. You would want like a senior software engineer, a senior test engineer, a UX expert, maybe et cetera. And you would also want, you want product, right? You'd also want people with structural authority, say VP of engineering, VP of product, maybe your sales, head of sales. You might want an HR representative because you might be looking to change compensation structures. So you need the people who have the authority to change the system, as well as people that can bring ground truth to discussions. And if you do that, and it doesn't have to be a less class, or it doesn't have to be about product development. This could be about, you know, I don't know, how to run a hospital better. The technique is applicable there as well. The downside is that there are some constraints. So people are still discovering, even though you give them the system variables, they're still having the modeling sessions. They're still thinking through things for themselves. But sort of like kids in an escape room, there's a little bit of artifice to it compared to starting from scratch, because you are kind of leading the horse to water, right? But what's interesting is there's enough where the participants are still largely engaged, and they're largely doing this modeling for themselves and coming to their own understanding. And the depth of learning outcomes are still better than you would get in a lecture format or any other system, any other approach I've seen. If your discussion topic is organizational design, I've never seen anything else that's as effective as this particular tool for that problem. If I was running a retrospective, I might use lean coffee, and that might be just as well, right? I might use 5 whys. I might use other techniques, but for what a certified less practitioner course is, which is really an organizational design course in disguise, this works really well. There's not a lot of time for ad hoc variables, again, due to time constraints in a classroom setting. There's a huge logistical footprint. If you want to do this physically, then I need about 12 linear feet of whiteboard, or like 1.5 meters, whatever that is, 2 meters or so of whiteboard per table. And that's hard to find in random, hotel venue. There's some stuff called Wizard Wall, which is really cool stuff, but it needs a nice smooth wall. So basically, I'm set up with flight cases. I can go anywhere on the planet, and I don't have to rely on the hotel to have the huge number of whiteboards that I would need. Because you ask a hotel for a whiteboard, they'll have 1 or 2, and they'll charge you $200 for a day for it. There's no way they're going to have 2 whiteboards per table. They just don't have it in inventory. And if they went and got it, they would charge you an arm and a leg. So I've got all this stuff packed down. So that's one of the problems with it. One of the good things about it is because it's a visual language and it gets that externalized, it results in much deeper learning than I would otherwise see. And it's not that causal loop diagrams are more magical than any other. It's any appropriate technique that externalizes it seems to work. The learning outcomes are deeper. The ability to gain alignment, because if you wanted to make significant organizational design decisions, if you wanted to actually change the power dynamics in an organization, you need to get people lined up to do it. And I don't know a better way to do this. I know how to have those conversations one-on-one with a bunch of different people, but prior to having a better understanding of how to use system modeling in a large group context, I didn't know how you could get a bunch of executives lined up without just talking to a bunch of them and then hoping that you could eventually get them on the same page. This is actually a way to facilitate, a cathartic conversation that otherwise just wouldn't happen. The modeling is too abstract by itself. I find it's best to keep grounding it back to concrete implementation, which is the way I've done that. I think if you walked into the door already having a really deep understanding of different concrete implementations, then I don't know that this would be necessary. For example, Craig's class is mostly, he points a ship into the deep ocean. The assumption is that celestial navigation, and we're not going to stay close to shore. And if you already have done all your reading on LESS, maybe SAFe, maybe Kanban, Discipline Agile, and you've kind of seen different approaches, then when you're doing the modeling, you're innately making those connections. I find that most people are not that well prepared. And so it helps to do a little bit of modeling and then say, let's use less as one reference implementation model and let's look at that. And then let's go and do more modeling. And I find that for most people, that works better. But I find that for people that are really well prepared, you don't need that part. But that's the anomaly in my experience. Now just vanity slides. Less is becoming increasingly more popular. If you wish to see it by grouped by flavors of companies. If you're new to Less, there's learning about Less. The Less website has a wonderful amount of information, but it's pretty segmented, and it's hard to know where to get started. And what this page mostly does is says, read this article, then read this one, then read this one, then read this one. Okay, now you've read enough that just go figure out what you want to read. But getting past that initial learning curve is what this is intended to address. Sorry, I'll let Tom get a picture here. So you get your QR code? All right. The class we talked about, whether it's the CLE, which is an executive workshop focused, which is basically the same, except you add an extra day to get alignment, decide what to do about it. Or if it's just knowledge transfer, which is what a 3-day CLP is, it's just a knowledge transfer session. I can do that. So, this is just marketing. There is close to you guys, the next Less conference is in Madrid, and that's worth knowing about if you're interested. I think I'm going to stop and let's do more questions if we have any. And I have intentionally been ignoring the chat because I think I would just be distracted and not been able to get where I got. Any questions? Anybody want to synthesize some questions that came out here?
So I think a key question that came out and that was asked, I'm just trying to see who it was who asked it. Eric Singleton is asking, how does this associate with Less? So what's the relationship between these two concepts?
So the way this relates to Less is twofold. One, you will see in a lot of the Less, so Less is all about systems thinking. Less is about how do we build an organization that inherently sustains the kind of culture and behaviors that we want. You can yell at the plants in the garden and it doesn't do any good, but if you change the garden conditions, then you'll get different outcomes. And one of the underlying messages in Less is that structure drives culture. You can talk about, how do you do your flow control, right? Are you doing Kanban? Are you doing a Scrum variant? What are you doing there? You can talk about that all day long, but unless you change the underlying power structures, unless you have cross-functional, cross-component teams, so you don't have dependency hell, unless you get these people close to the customers, unless you, and get rid of the middlemen, which there's all kinds of distortions that come in play by having those middlemen. You'll have problems if you don't address these issues. If you have compensation structures that incentivize, forced ranking among the team members, and so if you help your teammate, it's going to reflect negatively on you at the end of the year because they'll end up getting the bonus instead of you getting the bonus because somebody has to lose, right? If you have these kind of compensation structures, you're not going to have a garden conditions that make it possible to grow an adaptive organization. You can talk about value system and mindset all you want till you're blue in the face, and nothing happens. And I've had people say, but why do people think you can just come and install the Agile right? Like, that won't work, right? And, you can't change culture by fiat. But ask yourself, how long does it take before the culture changes when they announce a layoff? Or they go in and they restructure an org? I mean, these things reveal what the executives are really thinking and feeling and how they view things. If you say you really are in control as a team now, and you're truly empowered, and you're truly self-organizing, and we don't have babysitters to prevent you from, that are spoon feeding you what the requirements are, you will get different behaviors. And if you just talk about mindset and value system and, we're going to use this process framework or that process framework, you'll basically get the same thing you had in the past with new words on it. And unless it's the only approach I know of that has any significant body of knowledge written around it that goes after organizational design to the extent that it does. And in the books and in the training and on the website, you will very frequently see use of causal loop diagrams as a way to articulate those relationships. So this relates to less, not as what we just talked about, is exactly less. But if you want to understand less, one of the best ways to understand less is to work through a big, massive system model in which you discover for yourself how different organizational design choices influence adaptability and thereby influence value delivery. And if you then take the time while you're doing the modeling to compare what you are teaching yourself in the modeling, which has nothing to do with framework, and you say, but what does less happen to do? So you take a look at various reference content about, the less rules and examples of how less does multi-team refinement and all this sort of stuff. And you look at it and you go, wow, I see that the way my organization works today, I'm not set up to succeed. And I can see all this modeling is very frustrating because what it tells me is that what I'm teaching myself is that I'm set up to fail. But you say, but if I had an organization that was built differently, and let's say it's built like less is built, even if the words were different, but if the concepts were the same, then perhaps we really would have a more adaptive organization. I could see that working. So that's why I find value in going back and forth between the abstract and less as a concrete reference implementation model. In terms of flow control, if you know Nexus, less and Nexus are very, very similar in terms of flow control. In terms of, there's some subtleties. I like what less does slightly better than what Nexus does in places. But the thing that really matters that Nexus is silent on, that less is not, is less gets into the organizational dynamics. And it's not just about process flow. Does that answer the question?
That was a thorough answer. I was just remembering yesterday when you said that if you'd had this technique, systems modeling, earlier in your career, how differently you think you would have connected with people in the past. And that as a tool, it's probably what makes the training for agility so powerful, for less so powerful.
Because the key thing is you have to get the people who are really close to the work that have been slinging code for years and years, a lot of them know what the truth is, right? They've been suffering for years for organizations that are not aligned with the nature of the work. Mm-hmm. The challenge is getting the people with the authority to change the system to actually decide to do so. And so how do you get that group on board? And this tool is amazing at that. And that would be, so the only difference at least in my case, the only significant difference in a certified less practitioner course, which is 3 days of a model that just grows and grows and grows, right? coupled with, constantly going back and forth between the model, is when you do it in an executive context, you add an extra day and you say, okay, we just spent the last 3 days, last 2.5, whatever, if we compress it a bit. We just spent those last 3 days thinking through how different organizational design choices are influencing outcomes. And we looked at possible organizational design examples that would make it possible to be more adaptive. Now, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to do something like implement a less-like structure? If you're going to do it, I would recommend a bubble, what Les calls a parallel organization. And we're going to need to decide who are the people that we're going to let go to training and decide if they want to be part of that bubble, right? We need to decide if we have 4,000 engineers, we can't boil the ocean. So we need to find a sliver of our product that would be a good candidate to go build a bubble that has, half a dozen teams in it to start. And when people step into that new bubble, they realize my reporting relationships are different, my compensation structure is different, how I'm expected to operate as a team member is different, the org is flatter. I mean, all these things that are, we're changing the garden conditions. It's almost like taking a new job. They need to understand what's expected. We need to find out what that sliver is of that new product. We need to, what are we trying to accomplish if we go do this? Are we going to go spend, the money that's going to be required to go do this? And that's what you do in that extra day is you plan out, if we were to act, what would it look like? And at the end of that day, you say, okay, you get the highest paid person in the room. Are we actually going to move forward or not? And no is one answer. Yes is another answer. But whatever that is, it's a group decision, perhaps with a bit of coercion by the head guy, because you're going to have people that say, well, I really don't like this, but I don't want to speak up. And the real reason I don't want to change is because I like having, 50 people report through me, and this would change that, and I'm uncomfortable with it, right? But I don't want to verbalize that because that would make me not look like a team player. So there's some of that goes on, but
Okay.
So there's a couple more questions. Oh, sorry. Did you want to carry on, Ahmad?
Go on, go for it.
So Mike, can I leave you till last because I like the question, but I think it's going to sort of bypass some of the others. Jonathan asks, has anyone ever researched causal loop diagramming with biological systems?
I don't know, David, that may be a good question for you.
Yeah, so my first degree is in biology, and I can tell you absolutely. So this is a form of systems dynamics is what it's commonly known as, and it absolutely came out of the biology school of cybernetics. It was created by a guy at MIT in the 1950s. So yeah, no, absolutely, certainly, I have seen many causal loop diagrams. The classic one is body temperature, right? So if you've got 4 variables where you've got your body temperature, what happens when your body temperature increases? Well, you start sweating. Women, obviously, you don't start sweating, you start glowing. But men, we start sweating. What does that tend to lead to? Well, that tends to lead to evaporation. Evaporation tends to lead to the temperature going down. So you end up with a positive inverse loop. And that's called a negative feedback loop, which is by far the most common system you have in biological feedback.
Yeah, so that was kind of my sort of second part of the question. So people have done that, and it sounds like it's got from a similar source. But has anyone really put that into organizations? Because I've never seen a negative feedback loop. I think there should be, like the one where we had the code quality and defects. Oh, that ideally your team that spills out loads of defects you desperately want to stop, but I've often seen that not be the case.
The LESS community does this like crazy. That's the point. Like, you know, how is this used in the LESS community? The LESS community makes very frequent use of LESS. And if we were in you know, here is a, share my screen. So here is an example of, I mean, 3 days of modeling on the wall to get people to come to a deeper understanding, right? You know, we talked about, again, the CLE, which is basically knowledge transfer, which is kind of this loop that I talked about. And then you would spend time getting consensus on, the consensus would be, what's the product definition for the pilot? Who's going to be given an opportunity to participate in the pilot? What's the initial adoption boundary? What's a tentative timeline? You know, like, we're going to need like event space and train people up and then have them launch, self-organize into new teams and do a flip event, if you will. Any concerns that come up, and then are we going to do it or not? Right. So the LESS community makes very heavy use of system modeling. And, you know, this class is almost 3 days of system modeling. That includes all kinds of negative feedback loops, right? I mean, like, what happens when you get the engineers too far away from the customer? It screws things. What happens when you artificially, the initial sample model, which is used to kind of get people's feet wet, talks about code quality and what happens when you have artificial delivery pressure, and how does that mess stuff up and make it worse? Yeah, it's right there.
Brilliant.
Okay. And of course, we're modeling the real world here, right? So these systems do exist, but they're probably not visualized, and that's really the power of dynamic modeling. Is you're suddenly visualizing something that people know is already happening. So that's cool. Can we get a quick answer to one final question, assuming that my computer is going to work correctly? And I'm sorry, Mike, I don't think we're actually going to get to you. Oh, my chat has disappeared. Yi asks, is there any software that models causal loop? I did a quick search. There's a couple. Can you confirm if any of the ones, so he's mentioned Vensim and AnyLogic. Can you confirm if those are useful?
Most of my experience has been whiteboard style modeling. This is kind of like a UML question. Are there tools that do UML? Yeah, but usually they're more rigid. You know, unless you're trying to do code generation from them, they're more rigid than they're valuable. You're better off with the free form and ability to break away. But I know that if, like, people are doing, again, David, you'll know more. If people are like analyzing, you know, plane crashes, and there's all these complex series of events, there are notational syntaxes that are far richer than causal loop diagrams. And I don't know them. They're not, for the purposes of my utilization, it's just facilitating large group conversations, not let's try to make mathematical models in great depth and see what happens. But there are tools that do that.
I mean, with students, typically I give them a sheet of paper and a pen. It's like, don't try flying before you've learned to walk, really. You know, don't go for the difficult thing. I mean, Visio is perfectly good for this as well. You can use Mural or Miro. If you need to do actual simulation, there is software out there that does that, but it's rare that that's useful for the type of work we're using it for. Really, then you're talking about systems which are infinitely more complex and have got a lot of delays in them. So they've actually got reservoirs of stuff that you need to worry about, which we don't particularly. I think we're pretty much at time.
Yeah, I think we are. Okay, let's just wrap up. First of all, yeah, thank you, James.
Thank you for having me.
Insights. Thanks to our participants as well. Thank you for your contributions.